Welcome to The Explainer. So, if you're the kind of person who just loves dissecting the raw mechanics of authority, you are in exactly the right place. Today, we're embarking on a pretty fascinating exploration of supreme power. We usually look at the absolute peak of authority and we just see strength, invulnerability, and total control. But what if we've been looking at it all wrong? What if the ultimate goal of absolute power inherently carries this fatal, ironic flaw? We're going to look closely at some historical evidence that suggests the higher you climb and the more you try to protect yourself, the more trapped you actually become.
So that brings up the big question. Can a fortress actually become a trap? I mean, it totally goes against our basic instincts, right? We just assume that massive walls, layers of security, impenetrable barriers, they're all designed to keep danger out. They're supposed to be the absolute ultimate guarantee of survival. But the historical pattern we're unpacking today forces us to ask a really uncomfortable question. What if the very walls designed to protect a leader are exactly what destroys them? This is the central paradox we're going to unravel, and honestly, the examples are genuinely staggering.
Okay, let's dive into this. This source text makes this profound observation about human nature and power. Rulers, driven by this primal need to maintain control and survive, start building these elaborate layers of protection. And we aren't just talking about brick and mortar here. Actually, scratch that. It's way deeper than just walls. We're talking about layers of political bureaucracy, rigid protocols, and intense physical isolation. The intention, of course, is safety, but the outcome? It's completely different. They end up becoming totally paralyzed by these very same layers. It's like the protection literally cuts off the oxygen of the real world, leaving the ruler entirely incapacitated. Let's look at exactly how this happens.
Part 1. The Silent Emperor. Let's transport you back in time for a second, far away from the modern world, right into the ancient, highly ritualistic, and incredibly heavy atmosphere of Constantinople. This was an era where leadership wasn't just about passing policies, it was deeply intertwined with the divine. The reality of the Byzantine emperor was it's almost unimaginable to us today. He wasn't just a politician. He was considered God's vice-chair, essentially the earthly representative of the divine. Living in this grand city of Constantinople, his existence wasn't even his own. The text notes that his daily life was just this relentless, performance-driven ritual. Imagine that for a second. Every single moment is staged. And to demonstrate his absolute superiority over everyone else, how did he behave? Through total silence. He played this constant, rigid role that elevated him above the common man, sure, but it simultaneously stripped him of his basic human ability to interact naturally with the world.
Now, what's truly wild is the specific mechanism of this isolation, the logothete. Because the emperor had to maintain that unbroken, silent aura of superiority, he was actually forbidden to speak to foreign envoys directly. Just think about the strategic disadvantage of that. He had to rely entirely on a logothete, an official whose sole job was just to speak in his name. It's the ultimate example of a fortress becoming a trap. His political protection was so extreme and his status so elevated that the most powerful man in the empire literally couldn't even use his own voice to negotiate or persuade or connect with anyone.
The source text actually hits the nail on the head here, capturing the tragedy of the situation perfectly. It calls him a silent, distant statue of power. Just sit with that image for a second. A statue. Immovable, unfeeling, entirely disconnected from the shifting realities on the ground. The profound irony is that while he sat there in absolute, protected silence, radiating this supposed superiority, his empire literally crumbled around him. His fortress of ritual and silence kept him safe from having a conversation, but it rendered him completely blind and paralyzed to the decay destroying his realm from the outside in.
Part 2. The Insulated Mob Boss. We're doing a total 180 here, leaving the grand palaces of ancient Constantinople and fast-forwarding right into the gritty, pragmatic 20th century underworld. Now, you might think a street-level criminal empire operates on entirely different rules than an ancient divine monarchy, right? But this pattern of isolation, it is completely timeless. Enter Paul Castellano, head of the Gambino family. Unlike the mob bosses of earlier eras who led from the streets, Castellano ran his criminal enterprise like a businessman. And where did he run it from? An insulated mansion. This was his modern-day fortress. He traded the ancient rituals of Constantinople for the physical removal of a suburban estate. But the dynamic is exactly the same. His leadership style became completely detached from the gritty reality of the streets, the exact place where his organization actually operated and where his people bled.
And this brilliantly illustrates the fatal consequence of that detachment. First off, Castellano insulates himself in his mansion and issues this sweeping decree refusing to allow drug dealing. Now, because of his extreme detachment, he fails to realize how deeply this angers his street-level soldiers. I mean, their daily realities and incomes are tied directly to the streets he no longer walks. He's totally blind to the shifting mood of his own empire. And the inevitable conclusion? An assassination outside a steakhouse. His physical and bureaucratic isolation didn't protect him. It directly caused the resentment that led to his violent downfall. The insulated mansion failed him just as completely as the silent throne failed the emperor.
Part 3. The Gilded Prison. So, we've looked at two vastly different worlds here, but when we bring these stories together side by side, the overarching pattern is just undeniable. On one hand, we have the Byzantine emperor, who cultivated this silent aura of superiority, relied on a logothete to speak for him, and remained totally isolated while his empire completely fell apart. And on the other hand, we have Paul Castellano, acting as a businessman in an insulated mansion, experiencing extreme detachment from his street soldiers, which ultimately got him assassinated. We're talking two entirely different eras, two totally different types of empires, completely different scopes of authority. Yet the striking reality is identical. Their fortresses, whether they were made of silent rituals or actual mansion walls, became their inevitable tombs.
So what's the crucial takeaway here? Our source perfectly reframes this supreme authority as a gilded prison. This is the core of what you should take away from this entire explainer. When we look at absolute power, we shouldn't just be seeing the gold or the wealth or the influence. We really need to recognize the bars of the cage. Absolute power almost always creates an inescapable trap of the ruler's own making. In their quest for ultimate safety and supreme control, leaders end up cutting the very threads that connect them to reality. The mechanisms of their protection are exactly what paralyze them.
Now, take a look at modern leaders today, whether that's in politics, business, or any major organization. As they consolidate power, as they insulate themselves with these thick layers of advisors, security details, and rigid protocols, you have to ask yourself, are they building a fortress or are they really building a prison? The historical pattern we've explored today, from the crumbling walls of Constantinople all the way to a bloody sidewalk outside a steakhouse, tells us that it is almost always the latter. Keep this framework in mind the next time you see a leader completely isolated from the public. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the structures of power around you.